The doorbell rang at 10:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, which was unusual enough on its own. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where doorbells rarely rang after dinner, let alone nearly at midnight. I was already in my pajamas, reading in bed, when I heard David's footsteps padding down the stairs. The television had been off for over an hour. I heard the front door open, then silence. Not the polite silence of a brief exchange, but the heavy, loaded silence of shock. "David!" I called out, setting my book aside. No response. I grabbed my robe and made my way downstairs, tying the belt as I descended. The front door was still open, letting in the October chill. David stood frozen in the doorway, backlit by our porch light, staring at someone I couldn't yet see. "David, who is it?" He turned slightly, his face pale in a way I'd never seen before. His mouth opened, but no words came out. That's when I saw him. A teenage boy stood on our porch, shivering in a thin jacket. He was tall and gangly, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, and eyes that seemed too large for his gaunt face. He clutched a backpack to his chest like a shield. But what made my breath catch wasn't his disheveled appearance or the desperation in his eyes. It was his face. The sharp line of his jaw, the way his eyebrows arched, the set of his mouth. All of it was familiar in a way that made my stomach drop. He looked exactly like my husband. "Mr. Peterson," the boy said, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry to come here. I didn't know where else to go." David finally found his voice. "Ryan, Jesus, what happened? Are you okay?" Ryan, David knew his name. "Can I come in?" The boy's teeth were chattering. "Please, I'm sorry, I need help." David stepped aside immediately, ushering the boy into our foyer. I stood on the stairs, clutching my robe closed, trying to process what I was seeing. The resemblance was uncanny. If I'd seen them together on the street, I would have assumed they were father and son without question. "Emma," David said, finally meeting my eyes. The guilt written across his face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a surprise visitor. This was a secret that had just walked through our front door. "This is Ryan. We need to talk." "I think that's an understatement," I said quietly. Ryan looked between us, his eyes welling with tears. "I'm sorry. I know this is messed up. If there was anywhere else I could go." "You're cold," I heard myself say. My nurse's instincts overriding my shock. "And you look like you haven't eaten." "David, get him some food. I'll make up the guest room." "Emma, food first," I said firmly, then explanations. 20 minutes later, Ryan was seated at our kitchen table, demolishing a plate of leftover pasta, while David and I stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island, creating a triangle of tension. The boy ate like he was starving, barely pausing to breathe between bites. I studied him as he ate. He was about 16, maybe 17. His clothes were clean but worn, his jacket inadequate for the weather. There was a bruise on his left cheekbone, partially hidden by his hair. His hands trembled slightly as he ate. And that face. That face that looked so much like the man I'd been married to for 8 years that it made my chest tight with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. When Ryan finally pushed the empty plate away, he looked at David with an expression of such profound relief and trust that I felt like an intruder in my own kitchen. "Thank you," Ryan whispered. "Tell me what happened," David said gently. "Is it your mom's boyfriend again?" Again. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Ryan nodded, his hand unconsciously touching the bruise on his face. He came home drunk, started yelling about the money. Mom tried to stop him, but he swallowed hard. I couldn't stay there. I grabbed my stuff and left. I took the bus here. I'm sorry. I know you said to only call in emergencies, but you did the right thing, David said firmly. You're safe here. Excuse me, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Both of them looked at me. I need to speak with my husband, privately. Ryan, help yourself to anything in the fridge. We'll be right back. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out of the kitchen, through the living room, and into David's home office, knowing he would follow. He did, closing the door softly behind him. We stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the clock on his desk. David ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. How long? I asked. Emma? How long have you been supporting a teenage boy that I knew nothing about? A boy who, I might add, looks exactly like you? David's shoulders slumped. 3 years. 3 years? We'd been married for 8, together for 10. For nearly a third of our relationship, he'd been hiding this. Is he yours? The question came out as barely a whisper. What? No! David looked horrified. Emma, no. God, no. It's not like that at all. Then explain it to me. Because from where I'm standing, a teenage boy who looks like he could be your son just showed up at our door calling you by name, and you clearly have some kind of ongoing relationship with him that you've kept secret from your wife for years. David moved his desk chair and sat down heavily, his head in his hands. His name is Ryan Mitchell. He's 16. I met him 3 years ago through the Big Brothers program. The Big Brothers program. I tried to remember David ever mentioning volunteering for anything like that. I couldn't. I signed up right after. He paused, his voice catching. Right after we got the news about the infertility. The room seemed to tilt slightly. We'd spent 2 years trying to get pregnant before finally seeing a specialist. The diagnosis had been definitive. I couldn't have children. The memory of that day in the doctor's office still had the power to hollow me out. I didn't know how to talk to you about it, David continued quietly. You were so devastated, and I was trying to be strong for you, but I was hurting too. I needed, I don't know, an outlet, something to channel that paternal instinct into. So I signed up to be a mentor. And Ryan was your match. He nodded. He was 13 then, living with his mom and her boyfriend in a shitty apartment across town. His dad died when he was 8. The boyfriend is... He shook his head. He's not good to them. Ryan needed someone stable in his life, someone who could be there for him. For 3 years. Yes. And you never thought to mention this to me? David finally looked up, and I saw tears in his eyes. At first, I told myself I would. I thought I'd surprise you with it, show you that we could still have that parental relationship in our lives, even if we couldn't have biological children. But then, I saw how much pain you were in every time the subject of kids came up. You stopped going to family gatherings because you couldn't stand seeing your sister's kids. You unfollowed half your friends on social media because you couldn't handle the pregnancy announcements. It was all true, and hearing it said out loud made me want to sink into the floor. I thought telling you about Ryan would hurt you more, David said. make you feel like I was replacing the children we couldn't have. So I kept putting it off. And the longer I waited, the harder it got to tell you. It became this separate part of my life. Wednesday evenings and Saturday afternoons, I'd take him to baseball games, help him with homework, teach him to drive. I became important to him, and he became important to me. Wednesday evenings, I repeated slowly. Your evening meetings at the office? Some of them were real meetings, he said weakly. And the Saturday afternoons you spent catching up on paperwork? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I sat down in the chair across from his desk, trying to process everything. My husband had essentially been living a double life. Not with another woman, but with a teenage boy who needed a father figure. A boy he'd been supporting financially, because surely that's what Ryan had meant about the money. How much? I asked. What? How much money have you been giving him? Or his mother? David was quiet for a long moment. About $500 a month. For groceries, school supplies, clothes. Ryan's mom works 2 jobs, but she's barely keeping her head above water, especially with that boyfriend bleeding her dry. The money helps. $500 a month for 3 years. $18,000 that had come out of our joint account that I'd never noticed because David handled the finances. $18,000 spent on a child I didn't know existed. I should have been angry. I should have been furious. But instead, I just felt hollow. Does he know? I asked. About me? Of course he knows about you. I've talked about you. I told him that you didn't know about him, that it was complicated. That's one word for it. A soft knock on the door interrupted us. Ryan's voice came through, hesitant and small. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to say, Mr. Peterson, if this is causing problems, I can go. I'll figure something out. David was on his feet immediately, opening the door. You're not going anywhere. Not tonight. Ryan stood in the doorway, looking even younger now that the immediate terror had faded from his face. He was just a scared kid who'd come to the one person he trusted. The guest room's ready, I said, standing up. Top of the stairs, second door on the right. There are fresh towels in the bathroom cabinet. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson, Ryan said quietly. I really am sorry about all this. I looked at this boy, this stranger who'd walked into my house and upended my understanding of my marriage, and I saw the bruise on his face, the way his jacket hung on his thin frame, the fear still lingering in his eyes despite being somewhere safe. You don't have to apologize, I said. Go get some rest. After Ryan went upstairs, David and I stood in his office, the silence stretching between us like a canyon. I need some time, I said finally, to process this. Emma, no, I need you to give me space tonight. Sleep in here if you want. I can't right now. I left him standing there and went upstairs to our bedroom, passing the closed door of the guest room on the way. Inside our room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. My husband had been secretly mentoring a teenager for 3 years, supporting him financially, being the father figure Ryan desperately needed. And he'd kept it all hidden from me because he thought I couldn't handle it. The worst part was, he might have been right. I'd spent the last 3 years drowning in my grief over our infertility. I'd pulled away from anything that reminded me of children, of the family we'd never have. I'd built walls around that pain so high that David had felt he couldn't tell me about something that was clearly important to him. I cried then, for the first time in months. Not just for the children I'd never have, but for the distance that had grown between David and me, for the secrets and the silence, for the boy sleeping in our guest room who looked so much like my husband that it hurt to see. But also, in a strange way, I cried with something that might have been relief. Because the resemblance that had made my heart stop when I first saw Ryan wasn't what I'd feared. He wasn't David's biological son from some past relationship. He was just a kid who happened to share similar features with his mentor. A coincidence that must have made their connection feel even more significant to David. I must have eventually fallen asleep because I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of bacon cooking downstairs. I checked my phone. 7:45 a.m. I'd slept later than usual. When I made my way downstairs, I found David and Ryan in the kitchen. David was at the stove making breakfast, while Ryan sat at the table, doing homework from a textbook covered in protective plastic, like library books always were. They both looked up when I entered. David's expression was cautious, unsure of what kind of reception he'd get. Ryan looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. "Good morning," I said. "Morning," they replied in unison. I poured myself coffee and sat down at the table across from Ryan. Up close, in the morning light, I could see details I'd missed last night. There was indeed a resemblance to David, the dark hair, the strong jawline. But there were differences too. Ryan's eyes were hazel where David's were brown. His nose was straighter. The similarities were there, but they weren't as uncanny as they'd seemed in the shock of last night. "What are you working on?" I asked, nodding at his textbook. "Trig," Ryan said. "I have a test on Friday." "How's it going?" "I'm okay with most of it. The law of signs still trips me up sometimes." "That one always got me too," I admitted. "David's the math person in this house." A ghost of a smile crossed Ryan's face. "Yeah, Mr. Peterson's helped me a lot with this class. I was failing at the beginning of the year." David set plates of bacon, eggs, and toast on the table. We ate in awkward silence for a few minutes before I cleared my throat. "Ryan, can you tell me about your situation at home? I'm a nurse, so you don't have to worry about shocking me, and I need to understand what we're dealing with." Ryan glanced at David, who nodded encouragingly. The boy set down his fork and took a breath. "My mom's boyfriend, Travis, he's been living with us for about 2 years. He doesn't work much. When he does, he spends most of his paycheck at the bar. He's gotten physical with my mom a few times, and with me when I've tried to step in. Last night was the worst it's been. He was screaming about money, about how we were both useless, and Ryan's voice cracked. He threw a bottle that hit my mom. I think she might have needed stitches, but she wouldn't go to the hospital. Said we couldn't afford it." "Did you call the police?" I asked. Ryan shook his head. "Mom won't let me. She says it'll just make things worse. That he'll really hurt us if we get him arrested." It was a story I'd heard too many times in my years as an ER nurse. The cycle of abuse, the fear of retaliation, the complicated reasons people stayed in dangerous situations. "Where's your mom now?" I asked. "At work. She has the morning shift at the diner, then she goes to her evening job at the grocery store. She gets home around 11. And Travis?" probably sleeping it off. Ryan's jaw tightened. He usually doesn't get up until afternoon. I looked at David, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe, or fear of judgment. Here's what's going to happen, I said. Ryan, you're staying here until we figure out a safe plan. David, you're going to call your office and tell them you're taking the day off. We're going to talk to Ryan's mom, and we're going to figure out how to get both of them out of that situation. Emma, David started, unless you have a better plan? He shook his head, relief flooding his face. No, thank you. Ryan was staring at me like I'd just offered him the moon. Mrs. Peterson, I can't ask you to do all that. You don't even know me. You're right, I don't. But my husband clearly cares about you, which means I'm going to care about you too. That's how this works. And please, both of you, call me Emma. The next few hours were a whirlwind. David called in to work while I called the hospital to swap my evening shift with a colleague. Ryan gave us his mother's phone number, and after several attempts, we finally reached her during her break. The conversation was difficult. Carla Mitchell was defensive at first, embarrassed that her son had gone to a stranger's house, but as we talked, her defenses crumbled. She was a woman at the end of her rope, working 2 jobs to support a man who contributed nothing but violence, doing it all to keep a roof over her son's head. I know it's not good for Ryan, she said, her voice thick with tears. I know, but I can't afford rent on my own. And Travis helped us get this place. If we leave, we'll be homeless. What if that wasn't true? I found myself saying. What if there was another option? That evening, we drove to meet Carla at a coffee shop near her workplace. She was a small woman in her late 30s, with Ryan's hazel eyes and the worn-down look of someone who'd been fighting too long. She sat across from us in the booth, nervously twisting a napkin in her hands, while Ryan sat beside David. I watched them together, David, Ryan, and Carla, and saw the bond that had formed over 3 years of Wednesday evenings and Saturday afternoons. Saw the way Carla looked at David with gratitude and trust. Saw the way Ryan sat a little straighter with David beside him. Saw the way my husband had become exactly what they both needed. Someone stable, someone safe, someone who showed up. I have a friend from nursing school, I said. She runs a shelter for women and children escaping domestic violence. It's not a long-term solution, but it's a start. She can get you both in tonight if you want. I can't, Carla said immediately. I have work tomorrow, both jobs. If I miss shifts, I'll get fired. Then Ryan stays with us, I said. While you figure things out, take a few days, talk to the people at the shelter about resources, legal options, job placement services. They can help you find your own place, get a restraining order against Travis. But you don't have to do it all at once, and you don't have to do it alone. Why are you helping us? Carla asked, her eyes searching my face. You don't know us. I glanced at David, then back at her. Because 3 years ago, my husband saw your son needed help, and instead of looking away, he stepped up. He's been keeping it a secret from me, which we'll definitely be discussing in marriage counseling, but the impulse behind it was good. And I'm not going to be the person who stops that goodness from happening just because I wasn't in the loop. Carla started crying then, quiet tears that slid down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. Over the next week, our quiet house became something different. Ryan settled into the guest room with his handful of belongings. He'd wake up early to catch the bus to school. Then David would pick him up in the afternoon. They'd spend time on homework, or shooting hoops in the driveway, or just talking while dinner cooked. And I watched. I watched my husband come alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. The distance that had grown between us became visible in relief, thrown into sharp focus by its gradual dissolving. We started talking, really talking, for the first time in what felt like forever. David told me about the past 3 years, about Ryan's baseball games and his struggle with algebra and his dreams of becoming an engineer. About Carla's determination to give her son a better life despite her circumstances. About the moments that had made him feel like he was making a difference. "I thought I was protecting you," David admitted one night as we lay in bed. "But I was really protecting myself from having to face how far apart we'd drifted." "I pulled away," I said, "after the diagnosis. I was so consumed by what we'd lost that I couldn't see what we still had. I should have fought harder to reach you instead of creating a separate life. And I should have dealt with my grief instead of letting it consume me." We held each other in the darkness, mourning the time we'd lost, but grateful for the crisis that had forced us to find our way back. Carla moved into the shelter and started working with their counselors. A legal aid lawyer helped her file a restraining order against Travis and start divorce proceedings. She found a better-paying job with health insurance through the shelter's job placement program. Within 3 weeks, she had a small apartment of her own. Nothing fancy, but safe and hers. The day before Ryan was set to move back with his mother, I found him in the kitchen after school, staring at a college brochure. "What are you looking at?" I asked. "Engineering programs," he said. "Mr. Peterson, David, he says I could get scholarships, that I'm smart enough for a good school." "He's right." Ryan looked up at me. "Mrs. Peterson, Emma, why are you being so nice to me?" "Really?" I sat down across from him. "Can I tell you something?" He nodded. "When David and I found out we couldn't have children, it broke something in me. I spent years angry at the universe for taking that possibility away. And in that anger, I pushed away everything and everyone that reminded me of what I'd lost, including my husband." "I'm sorry," Ryan said quietly. "Don't be. Because here's what I've learned from having you here. There are a lot of ways to be a family. Biology is just one of them. David chose to be in your life. He chose to show up for you week after week, year after year. That's family too. And if you're family to him, then you're family to me." Ryan's eyes welled up. "I've never really had a dad. Mine died when I was little, and I barely remember him. But David, he's been the closest thing." "I know. I don't want to mess up your marriage. I don't want to be the reason you guys have problems. You're not. The problems were already there. You just brought them into the light where we could deal with them. That's actually a gift, even if it didn't feel like one at the time." That evening, we had dinner with Carla at her new apartment. It was small but clean, with second-hand furniture and a kitchen table that wobbled. But Carla glowed with pride as she showed us around, and Ryan couldn't stop smiling. "I start my new job on Monday," Carla told us over pizza. "Better hours, better pay, And Ryan's school is only 2 buses away instead of 3. We'll still see you both, David said, if that's okay. Are you kidding? Carla laughed. You try disappearing on us now, Ryan would hunt you down. We both would, Ryan added with a grin. After dinner, as we were leaving, Carla pulled me aside. Thank you, she said, for everything, for not hating me for the position I put my son in, for helping us get out. You got yourself out, I said. We just held the door open. Still, you didn't have to, especially after finding out your husband had been hiding us from you. I smiled. We're working on that, but honestly, Carla, I'm glad he didn't walk away. I'm glad he saw Ryan and thought, this kid needs help, instead of, this isn't my problem. That's the man I married, even if we lost sight of each other for a while. Carla hugged me then, tight and fierce. You're good people, both of you. 3 months later, David and I sat in our newly remodeled home office, previously his alone, now set up with 2 desks so we could work side by side. We'd just finished a session with our marriage counselor, which we'd been attending weekly since the night Ryan showed up at our door. How are you feeling about everything? I asked David. He thought for a moment. Good, really good actually, like we're finally on the same page for the first time in years. We are, I agreed, about a lot of things. He looked at me curiously. Why do I feel like there's something specific you want to talk about? I pulled out a folder from my desk drawer and handed it to him. He opened it, confusion crossing his face as he looked at the paperwork inside. Foster parent certification? He read. I've been thinking, I said, about what you said that first night. About needing an outlet for your paternal instinct. About wanting to make a difference in a kid's life. You found that with Ryan, and watching you with him these past few months. David, you're a natural at this. Emma, let me finish. I've been doing a lot of soul searching. About what I want from life. About the grief I was carrying. About the future. And I realized something. I was so focused on the specific way I thought we'd have a family that I couldn't see other possibilities. But there are thousands of kids out there like Ryan who need stable homes, who need parents, and we could be those parents. David's eyes were shining. Are you sure? I don't want you doing this just because I'm not, I interrupted. I promise you, I'm not. I've talked to my therapist about it extensively. I've done research. I've gone to information sessions. This is something I want, not as a replacement for biological children, but as its own thing. We have so much love and stability to offer. Why not share it? This is really what you want? It is, if it's what you want too. He pulled me into a hug, and I felt him trembling slightly. Yes, he whispered. God, yes. We started the certification process that week. It was extensive. Background checks, home studies, training sessions. We learned about trauma-informed parenting, about the unique challenges of foster care, about the heartbreak of reunification, and the joy of providing stability. Ryan was our biggest cheerleader through it all. He'd come over for dinner every Wednesday. Some traditions were worth keeping, and pepper us with questions about our progress. You guys are going to be amazing, he said one evening. Some kid is going to be really lucky to have you. We learned from the best, David said, ruffling Ryan's hair. Aw, come on, Ryan protested, but he was grinning. A year after that October night when a scared teenager showed up at our door, we got the call about a placement. A 9-year-old girl named Sophie who'd been removed from her home after her mother's arrest. She was scared, angry, and convinced that all adults would eventually abandon her. The first few weeks were hard. Sophie tested every boundary, pushed every button. She broke things, lied about little stuff, hoarded food in her room. But we'd been trained for this. We knew it wasn't personal. We knew it was fear. Slowly, painfully slowly, she started to trust. Started to believe that we'd still be there in the morning, that we meant it when we said she was safe. 3 months into the placement, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with Ryan. He was helping her with her math homework, patiently explaining fractions in a way her teacher hadn't. "That's how David explained it to me," he was saying. "It helps if you think of it like pizza slices." Sophie giggled at something he said, and my heart squeezed. This collection of people who'd found each other through crisis and choice, through need and compassion, this was family. David came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You okay?" he murmured. "Better than okay," I said. "I'm happy." That night, after Sophie was asleep and Ryan had gone home to his mom's apartment, David and I sat on the back porch with glasses of wine, looking up at the stars. "I never would have imagined this," I said. "That night when Ryan showed up, I thought our marriage might be over, that the secret you'd been keeping was unforgivable." "I thought so too," David admitted. "I was so sure I'd destroyed everything. But instead, it saved us, in the weirdest, most roundabout way possible." "Do you think you can forgive me? For real?" I thought about it. "I already have." Because here's the thing I've learned. You kept Ryan a secret not because you were being malicious, but because you were trying to protect me. It was misguided and it hurt us both. But the impulse came from love. And in the end, your secret brought us something we desperately needed, a wake-up call. A reminder that there are other ways to build a family, that love isn't limited to biology. "I love you," David said. "I should have told you that more, should have told you everything more. We both made mistakes, but we're fixing them now. That's what matters." 6 months later, we finalized Sophie's adoption. Ryan and Carla came to the courthouse, along with both sets of our parents and a handful of close friends. When the judge declared Sophie legally ours, she burst into tears, the happy kind, and threw herself into my arms. "I'm really yours?" she whispered. "Forever?" "Forever," I promised. At the celebration lunch afterward, Ryan sat next to Sophie, the two of them laughing over some private joke. Carla caught my eye across the table and smiled. David's hand found mine under the table and squeezed. This wasn't the family I'd imagined years ago when we first started trying to have children. It was messier, more complicated, born from secrets and crisis and difficult conversations. But it was ours, built not from biology, but from choice, from showing up, from keeping the door open to a scared teenage boy on a cold October night. That boy had become a young man now, thriving in his first year of college on a full scholarship. He came home every holiday, every break, settling into what had become his room. We'd moved Sophie into the guest room and given Ryan his own space, painted in his school colors. "You know what's funny?" I said to David one evening as we watched Sophie and Ryan play board games in the living room. What's that? Remember how I thought Ryan looked exactly like you that first night? Yeah. I don't see it anymore. I mean, there's a resemblance, but it's not uncanny. I think I was just in shock and seeing what I feared most, that you had this whole other family I didn't know about. David laughed. For the record, I never saw it. The resemblance, I mean, I just saw a kid who needed help. That's because you have a good heart, even when you're an idiot about keeping secrets. Hey, it's true. You're my favorite idiot, though. We watched as Sophie landed on Ryan's property in Monopoly and dramatically declared bankruptcy. Ryan graciously offered her a loan at 0 interest, which she accepted with theatrical relief. They were siblings now in all the ways that mattered, bickering and laughing and looking out for each other. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Ryan hadn't shown up that night? David asked quietly. If he'd gone somewhere else for help? I thought about it. I think eventually we would have hit a crisis point anyway. Maybe we would have worked through it, maybe not. But I'm glad it happened the way it did. I'm glad Ryan came here. I'm glad he trusted you enough to ask for help. Me too. Although next time you decide to secretly mentor a teenager, maybe give me a heads up first? David pulled me closer. Deal, but for the record, I think our plate is pretty full right now. As if on cue, the phone rang. David answered it, listened for a moment, then looked at me with raised eyebrows. It's the agency, he said, covering the mouthpiece. They have a sibling set, brother and sister, ages 7 and 10. The placement they were in fell through. They're asking if we'd consider it. Just respite care for now, maybe a week or 2. Sophie looked up from her game. Are we getting more siblings? She asked hopefully. I looked around at our living room, at the family we'd built from broken pieces and second chances. At Ryan, who'd started it all. At Sophie, who'd taught us that love could heal even the deepest wounds. At David, who'd shown me that secrets could sometimes lead to grace. What do you think? I asked David. He smiled. I think we have room. I took the phone. Tell us more about them, I said to the caseworker. Outside, the October wind rustled the leaves, almost a year to the day since a scared teenager had rung our doorbell and changed everything. Since a secret had become a revelation, and a crisis had become a blessing. There would be challenges ahead. There always were. More hard conversations, more moments of doubt, more nights wondering if we were doing the right thing. But we'd face them together, all of us. This family we'd chosen and built and fought for. Pizza for dinner? Ryan called from the living room. To celebrate the adoption? And the maybe new siblings? Sophie added. Pizza it is, I agreed, hanging up the phone. David, you're in charge of ordering. Get enough for an army. Who knows what this family will look like by this time next week? He grinned at me, that smile I'd fallen in love with 10 years ago, and pulled out his phone. And as I watched him coordinate with our expanding family about toppings and breadsticks, I felt a profound sense of peace. We weren't the family I'd planned. We were so much better. The end.